Hello my viewers, today we are going to be talking about how to have a proper exposure. As you all know, the goal of every photographer is to have a proper exposure. Without a proper exposure, you cannot have a visible image to work with. So we are going to be talking about three variables that you can control in your camera to have a proper exposure, the side or the darker side. How to be able to control it? They are called variables. So we have three variables. These variables are aperture, which is also known as f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. What is aperture or f-stop? Aperture is a hole inside the lens of the camera. It's controlled by the lens, not the camera. Why shutter speed? The shutter speed is the time at which the shutter of the camera is open. The shutter of the camera open up, the light enters to the camera, okay, to the mirror, hits the sensor, and the light projected and hits the subject. So that's how we have the image represented. Okay, so the time that it takes the shutter to open up, the amount of time, that is what we call shutter speed. What about ISO? ISO, we call it international standard organization like that. But actually in camera we call it is a company that actually code that the ISO particular. So every camera, every product has that one specific ISO 100, 200, 300, 400 like that. So ISO, what it actually simply means, talk about that has to do with the light sensitivity. How sensitive the light is, how sensitive the light is. Okay, the light that is entering through your camera, how sensitive it is. So either being low or too high. The ISO control the amount, how to do with the amount of light entering into the camera. So that is light sensitivity. So we have the byproduct of these three variables, like the aperture, which is also known as f-stop. The byproduct of that is called depth of field. And what is depth of field? Depth of field is when the camera or when the subject, the image, or the subject, okay, is in focus till infinity, when it starts not to be in focus again. For instance, you have your object here, you want to take a photograph of someone. When that person starts to be in focus, till when that person stops to be in focus, when you start not to see that person again, that is called depth of field. So we have low, shallow depth of field and deep depth of field. How do you know an object is having low depth of field or shallow depth of field? You will know that, for instance, like you have from f-stop, we said aperture is also known as f-stop. So we have f-stop, for instance, f-stop 2, 3, 4, like that, 5, 6, 12, like that. For instance, if you're having f-stop of f-stop, don't forget, we also call it aperture. So f-stop, we call it like is a hole inside the lens. So if you're having f-stop of 2, that is very low depth of field, because it starts having a kind of blurry background. It's called low depth of field. Low depth of field in the sense that when the subject start to be in focus to when it stop to be in focus, start seeing some background being blurred or staccato, start blurring at the background. So that is shallow depth of field, and such number of that f-stop that you start having there will not be more than something like, depending on your camera or your lens, your lens, don't forget your lens, not the camera, the lens. the lens is attached to the camera. So the f-stop of the aperture is controlled by the lens of the camera, not the camera itself. So something like 2, 3, they are very good lens to blur the background. Even for somehow, but you still have some sharp background. With that, you have shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field is that you start having the kind of okays, in video, you start having okay, something like the blurry background. With video, in cinematography, you want to blur the background, it's called it okay, so that f-stop. So, like f2, you have blurry background, f4, f1. But something like f12, that is deep depth of field. Deep in the sense that when the subject is in focus to when it stops not to be in focus, and to when it stops not to be in focus is even very wide, very clear. Okay? So you have deep depth of field. Deep depth of field in the sense that even the subject and the background all are in focus. Or you are capturing everything very clearly. Alright? So such number always start from, depends anyway on your lens. Even f12, f11, f10, f8, so like that. So I want also to note this. The smaller the hole of the lens, which is the f-star, the smaller the hole of the lens of the camera, the smaller the hole. I want you to imagine it this way. The larger the number, if the hole of the lens of the camera is very tiny, you have a very high f-star. Maybe f-star of 12, 10, like that. If the hole is wide, the number is small. For instance, you are having like this is very shallow depth of field of, for instance, 2, 1, 2, 3, as the case may be. But if you are having a hole of this very small, like you are having a very f-star of like 12. So this is very deep. It's called deep depth of field in the sense that the light is able to penetrate. Okay, no excusing, very tiny. So when the light comes in, it is in focus. Just like your torchlight, you are pointing it towards a wall through a very tiny hole, and you're looking towards the image. It's very protrusive and very sharp. Okay, unlike you having a very wide hole, the rate at which the light transfer and start shattering anyhow, and very bright, and you are not going to having a case. So that f12 having a very large, that f12 having a very small hole, very in deep focus. So it will capture the subject and the subject and the background, the subject and the foreground in focus. That is deep depth of field. But the shallow depth of field start having like f-star of 2, 4. All those ones that are called shallow depth of field in the sense that the hole is very big. The number is small, but the hole is big. The lens is very big. So more light entering in. As more light is entering in, you are having shallow depth of field. Okay? As the hole is very small. Okay? Little light is coming in anyway, but the light that is coming as getting being fused together to have a very clear picture. By so doing, you have a very deep depth of field. If your objective is to have a frozen moment, you want to freeze. Let me use that one. You want to freeze your subject. So what do? You have to increase the shutter speed. Okay? You have to increase the shutter speed. You can bump up to the shutter speed to like 1 over, depending on your camera, 1 over 100, 1 over 500, like that. There are some of these cameras that comes with 1 over. For instance, 1 over 2. And 1 over 10. That is one fraction. 1 over 2, 1 over 2 and 1 over 10. The 1 over 2 is larger, isn't it? The mathematics now. The 1 over 2 is larger than 1 over 10. So the 1 over 10 is smaller, isn't it? Which means that you take the picture, as in you take the picture more faster than the 1 over 2, which is the bigger. 1 over 2 is larger than 1 over 10. So 1 over 10 is lesser than 1 over 2, isn't it? So 1 over 10 take the more picture faster than 1 over 2. So if your objective, if your mindset is to take the picture at a very faster rate, for instance, you want to take a photo shoot of the child, you need to bump up the shutter speed because you don't want to experience any form of blurry. As I said, the byproduct of the shutter speed is having a blurry from another. So you start having blurry, kind of movement. So you don't want that to happen when you are shooting. So that's not what you want. So you have to make sure that your shutter speed is increased. So having a very fast shutter speed, or maybe a car race, you want to freeze, or in a sport, you want to freeze the moment. You want to freeze the moment, so you have to increase it so that you won't have a kind of maybe handshake or leg, blurry face, and you are not getting everything in focus. So, but also know, by so doing, when you're having a very fast shutter speed, the implication is that the lights will not get to the camera or to the lens enough because you are releasing it. The light that's entering through the sensor is at a very lesser amount. So in that scenario, you have to either bump up your ISO to assist the shutter speed, because your shutter speed is very small amount of time that the light is entering in, because it's very fast. Unlike maybe 1 over, for instance, 1 over 2, that one is more delayed. So as it's more delayed, more light is entering. But in this case, lesser light is entering, but it's capturing very fast moment. So it's either you bump up the ISO or you bump up your f-stop, which is aperture. How do you do that? I told you, the larger the number, the larger the hole, the smaller the number. So the one of a smaller number has a bigger hole. So you need to do what? Decrease your number, maybe 1 over, like maybe 4, 8, depending on the situation of the environment. Okay? So the larger the hole, the smaller the number. The one that has a very big hole has a small number. So when the hole is very big, it means that the number is small. That's talking about the aperture, which is the f-stop. So you need to either increase the f-stop, f it with the f-stop, or aid it with the ISO to increase it. But note that the ISO is always at the last edge, because you don't want to actually work with your ISO too much, more especially in the daytime. Okay, the ISO should not be too high, but when it starts having more ISO like 800, like that, 16,000, like that, so we start having a kind of a grain of noise at the background, which you don't want that to happen. It's aid in a very low light situation. That's when you should mostly use it, when you have already utilized your shutter speed and aperture. When there is no way to actually play with this very good, that's when you can make it up this ISO to increase it. When the ISO is too low, it's not good. When it's too high, also you have noise. So know how to make use of this to balance the equation. If your objective is to have a blurry background, know that your f-stop is going to be small number. The small number means that it's having a very large hole. Okay, something like 2, depending on your lens. Something like 2, 4, 1, depending on your lens. So as the hole is big, more light is entering. As more light is entering, the ISO must not be too much. You have to lower your ISO so that you won't have high exposure. Okay, and also your shutter speed must be very fast, because the hole is very big, more light is entering in, so you need to decrease the shutter speed also, and either of the two, and ISO. Okay, but if your goal is to have a very sharp background, sharp subject, sharp background, and everything in focus, that's a deep depth of field. Okay, you have a very large, a very small hole, a number like f-stop of 12, 11, 10, 8, 12, 13, like that, 14, depending on your camera. Okay, when you have such number like 10, 12, 13 like that, the hole is very small. As the hole is small, light is entering, and light that is being fused. As being fused is always very sharp. Okay, entering in there. But the implication is that the shutter speed now, you need to increase. You need to bump up your shutter speed to be delayed a little. So that is the word. Delay your shutter speed so that, because the hole is very small, light is entering, but light is struggling to enter the hole. So you need to decrease the amount of time. Okay, the light is entering. That is shutter speed now. The shutter speed will not be too fast, but once the shutter speed is too fast, lesser light, you need to just open and close. But once the light is delayed to be entering little by little, it's exposed to light a little before the hole closed. The shutter that you release close up. Do you get the logic? So when your mindset, your objective is to have clear picture background, the foreground, the background to infinite, that is the deep depth of field. Work on your shutter speed and the ISO to help increase the light. You decrease the shutter speed, okay, so that light will be able to enter through the hole, because the hole is very small, so you need more light to hit it, and the ISO also have to be within the range. Depending if it's on the daytime, you can use the ISO, and everywhere is bright, the ISO of 400, okay, 400, 300, 200 in some cases. Okay, then help it with the shutter speed, delay it a little. So check with these variables. So I always advise my viewers to always work on with manual mode. Manual mode will help you to work professionally and able to work with all this without limitation. Just the ability for you to work with these three variables. Once you understand these variables, you won't actually have any issue as regards to exposure. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Please be free to ask any question, and we'll be pleased to respond. Thank you very much.